The Projection Booth podcast is sponsored by Scarecrow Video. Try out Scarecrow's rent-by-mail service. Choose from over 150,000 films and get Blu-rays, 4Ks, and DVDs delivered directly to your door. Visit scarecrow.com today.
Hold your ears, folks. It's showtime.
People pay good money to see this movie. When they go out to a theater, they want cold sodas, hot popcorn, and no monsters in the projection booth.
Everyone pretend podcasting isn't boring.
Turn it off. Turn it off.
Not since Scarface, so much action. Not since the Marx Brothers, so much comedy. Not since the 7-Year Itch, so much Marilyn. The best picture this year will also be the funniest.
Good night, sugar. Good night, honey.
There's one thing sure, boy never met girl like this before. You've never laughed more at sex or a picture about it.
You stay here as long as you like.
Jack may have beaten Tony to the sugar, but not for long.
You're not giving yourself a chance. Don't fight it. Relax.
Welcome to the Projection Booth. I'm your host, Mike White. Joining me once again is Mr. Keith Gordon.
Hello.
Also joining us is Ms. Heidi Honeycutt.
Hello.
Comedy Month continues with a look at Billy Wilder's 1959 classic, Some Like It Hot. The film stars Jack Lemmon and Tony Curtis as a pair of musicians who witness the St. Valentine's Day Massacre and go on the lam as women in an all-girl band where they meet Sugar Kowalczyk, played by Marilyn Monroe. We will be spoiling this film as we talk about it, so if you don't want anything ruined about this 60-some-year-old film, please turn off the podcast and come back after you've seen it. You will not regret it at all. So, Keith, when was the first time you saw Some Like It Hot, and what did you think?
First time I saw it, I was a kid. I think my parents showed it to me, and I think we watched it like on TV, so it was probably some terribly cut up. I'm old enough that seeing a movie on TV meant commercials every 10 minutes, scenes taken out, just awful looking print. But I thought it was hysterically funny. I, of course, didn't get a lot of the subtlety. I was probably 10, 12 years old. It was more of the tittering at guys dressed up as women than it was at getting any of the deeper stuff. Then I saw it again later in my teen years when I became a rabid film fan and I got more of it. And I can think, look, it's one of those, any great film, every time you see it, new things, different things. And rewatching it for this, there are a bunch of stuff I thought either I don't remember that or that's even more interesting than I remember. Because you remember all the broad comedy, but it's, wow, there's a lot of other things in this movie too. I don't know how, it's probably my 6th or 7th time with it, and it grows every time.
And Heidi, how about yourself?
I too was a child when I saw Some Like It Hot for the first time, and I think it was also on television. And I don't know if my parents were there. My parents were not big movie people, so I did a lot of television watching by myself as a child because that's how I was raised, with the television. And I always loved the movie. I always thought it was really funny. This would have been around the time that shows like, for all the young people who don't know what these shows are, shows like Three's Company and Bosom Buddies were on. And these were shows that were late 70s, early 80s, and just starting to flirt with the idea of maybe there are gay people who are alive and do normal things. And wouldn't that be crazy? Or people might have sex outside of marriage. And so I saw this movie, which is obviously a much older film than that. like 20 years older, 30 years older than that when I was watching these other shows. And it resonated with me that these were almost some of the same themes that you would see in 1981, 1982 that people would be watching in 1959. And I thought that was silly and fun. And I love the movie. I've always been a Marilyn fan. I love Marilyn Monroe. I think she's a brilliant actress. I really do. And I think she's a fantastic comedian. And this film really lets her not only do that really sad, poignant thing that she can do really well in other films, but also do her comedy, which she does fantastic. So I love it for that.
Yeah, I'm right there with you guys. I think I also saw this on television for the first time. And Heidi, I'm glad that you brought up Three's Company, Bosom Buddies. I would throw Soap into that mix as well, where Billy Crystal was, I think, one of the early openly gay characters. I seem to remember him going in drag a few times, but that didn't really fit with his character, if memory serves. Like, he was just a gay man, not necessarily a transvestite or transsexual. And yeah, Bosom Buddies was a huge deal for me. I didn't realize just how short-lived that show was. I think it was only 2 seasons, but I felt like it was such a major part of television for so long.
One thing I do remember about Bosom Buddies and Three's Company is that it always seemed a little pervy to me. Like it had that sort of 1980s, that kind of Porky sensibility where people are always like trying to watch each other naked, or things that today would get you banned from Twitter just because you cannot do these things. But back then it was considered comedy to look up a woman's skirt or things like that. It has a little bit of that in it. It's a little more sophisticated than that, but there's definitely a hint of that in Some Like It Hot as well.
Oh yeah, 100%. Anytime a man gets to go into the sanctorium of the woman's locker room, the woman's changing room, all of the women on the train or in the hotel rooms, it's like their eyes just bulge out of their head. So this movie, I did not know until I started doing my research that this was actually made twice before, that there were a 1935 version called Fanfare d'Amour, which was directed by Richard Potier and starred Fernand Gravy and Julianne Corrette. I didn't recognize Gravy, but Corrette I knew from Rules of the Game and The Grand Illusion. He's fantastic in both of those. He's really good in this one as well. There's a really nice restored print of it with subtitles out there. I would recommend that people check it out. No subtitles for I think it was 51 version, Fanfaren de Liebe. So I wasn't able to watch that with subs. That one, both of those movies, it's interesting because it's very similar to Bosom Buddies in that they are going in drag because of economic reasons. There's no threat of death. It isn't until Wilder and Diamond come in that they add in the whole mob element. And then it's interesting that since then, remakes of this always have the danger. Like there is a real need for them to dress up in drag and hide out someplace. So very interesting twist that they gave this to the 1959 version. And I gotta say, I mean, you said Marilyn Monroe is great. She is. Tony Curtis and Jack Lemmon. This was probably some of the early Jack Lemmon that I saw when I was growing up as a kid. I'm sure that they were showing like The Odd Couple and stuff, but this one, oh my God, for me, he's the star of the show. Like, I love Tony Curtis, I love Marilyn Monroe, but for me, the Jack Lemmon thread is the thread that I always go back to. I just love his role, and I love how he embraces the drag, and I love that when they're talking about going in drag, it's like, whoa, we're Jerry and Joe, so we'll be Geraldine and Josephine. But then when he introduces himself, he goes,
well, here we are.
Are you two from the Polypuff Agency?
Yes, we're the new girls.
Brand new. This is our manager, Mr. Beanstalk.
How do you do?
And I'm Sweet Sue.
My name is Josephine.
I'm Daphne.
Mm-hmm.
He's already picked out a name. Who knows how long he's picked out that name for?
It so reminds me of Bosom Buddies, where it's that whole when they introduce each other. There's that same chemistry between those two main actors and Bosom Buddies as well. But the way they stick it to each other, where they're Buffy and Hildegard, I still remember that scene. I just rewatched the pilot the other day which is odd because they've replaced all the music, so it's not Billy Joel.
I rewatched it too, and I was like, oh my God, thank God they replaced it, because it's not nearly as good as the Billy Joel, I think. But yeah.
I don't believe I've seen you two around here before.
No, you haven't. We just got in from Canada.
Yes, 2 Canadian girls in the big city, just like Margaret Trudeau.
Oh, heavens me, I have been so rude. I haven't introduced us. This is my sister, Hildegard.
Hildegard.
And this is my sister, Buffy.
You look like a Buffy.
I never thought so.
But yeah, I just love that relationship. And I love the relationship between Lemmon and Curtis, because they basically become this comedy team throughout this whole movie. And you would never think Lemmon and Curtis are a comedy team. I'm surprised they didn't I know they were in other movies together, but I'm surprised they didn't just start making a whole series of films, because the chemistry that these guys have is great.
And when you think about the fact that it was this close to being Curtis and Frank Sinatra, and what a disaster that would have been, it was such a weird thing that was who, I guess it was the money people, not really so much Wilder, but that Wilder was willing to go along with it, where the first idea was Frank Sinatra. And it just, without Lemmon as a comic hub, Sinatra, I never thought was a great actor, and certainly I never thought it was a great comic actor. And it just, wow, that would have been a different movie.
Yeah, ring-a-ding-ding. I can really see that.
I think it would have been a very different film. Frank Sinatra has his own charm, of course, but I don't know if it would have worked as well, but it definitely would have been, I would definitely watch that movie too. Let me put it that way.
Talking of the mob edition and the danger that they're adding to it, these mobsters are fantastic. Having George Raft kind of later in his career coming back as Spats, and his group of goons, Mike Mazurki, we've talked about him on the show before.
So much. Yeah,
he's always great. And then the real star of the show for me is Harry Wilson. Harry Wilson steals the show. Every line he has gets a huge guffaw out of me. And just that voice and that face, it's just perfect every time he comes in and says anything.
Where were you guys? We was with you at Rigoletti's.
Harry Wilson is one of those actors that you see him pop up throughout the years in so many other films. And usually he's playing a henchman of some kind, but sometimes he'll get another role. But he's just one of those, he's like a Mazurki type. He's the perfect henchman. And he's always henchman number 4.
And then the sequel, the thing at the end with Nehemiah Persoff, which was a sequence I'd really forgotten, but as the kind of little Napoleon, which seeing it again, it's like something out of a David Lynch movie. That is the weirdest, and in a great way, weirdest sequence. This guy with this hearing aid, and like the whole thing is so bizarre and wonderful. And like it again subverts, it takes all the cliches, but it also subverts it. And it's the thing that you realize about Wilder and Diamond is that how brilliant they were at taking a lot of tropes and cliches and things that go back to Shakespeare or whatever, but then also making them very specific and very odd and very unique to the film. There have been 8 trillion men hiding in drag or men characters, but everything is specific. It's never just, oh, this is funny because it's people dressing up as something that isn't what they usually are, or mobs. George Raft is allowed to be really scary, which is great. If you didn't buy him, I don't think the movie would work as well. They actually create, in this very, very silly movie in a way, they create a real danger. And I love that they didn't push George Raft to come off as goofy or funny, or George Raft doing a parody of George Raft, because to me, what makes the movie work so well is it feels really motivated. It's completely silly, but it also, there is really a danger. And that makes then everything that happens actually feels motivated, as opposed to it's a movie, so we'll just have them dress up.
The difference between the previous films and Some Like It Hot, what makes Some Like It Hot better in many ways as a story is that element of they are desperate, right? They're desperate for their lives. It's not just, oh, we're short on rent money or whatever, or we're opportunistic. It's literally we're running for our lives. So if we get caught, there's a lot more at stake than just getting kicked out of the hotel or whatever. But I think it also served to placate the audience as to why would men ever willingly dress up like women unless they absolutely had to. Oh, okay, so we'll forgive them for going in drag, so we can still like these characters, even though it's super gay. But I think it worked. It worked for both purposes.
Going back to Raft, I love that he is so menacing, and yet he is also making fun of his own character. The way that he yells at the one guy, like, "Where'd you get that cheap trick?" when he's flipping the coin, and I'm like, "From you, sir." From you in I think it was Scarface, right? Or the way that he channels Jimmy Cagney at one point when he picks up a grapefruit and he's going to smash it in somebody's face. I'm just like, oh, that's great. And I love how for this and for the previous episode we did about The Good Fairy, I watched 1, 2, 3, and that's got James Cagney also doing the grapefruit gag in there too. So parroting himself. So Wilder was just so tuned into Hollywood tropes and everything that he could easily make these references from one movie to the other. Just even making this a remake of these other two films, I think he pulls some things from the German version specifically, especially around the maracas that we have later on in the film, which is probably the smartest thing I've ever seen in a movie, using these maracas to give room for laughter, because every single line Lemmon has in that scene kills.
The character dynamics between the two guys is very much similar throughout the previous two films too. Like, I feel like that really carried over also. Like, they took the good parts of and there's the taller guy and the shorter guy, and they have this sort of very specific dynamic between the two of them that worked really well. And they did it again in the German version because it worked well, and then Billy Wilder did it again. I want to also say Edward G. Robinson, they bring him into this too at the end, right? And yes, as like a call to like gangster films, and yeah, I just thought that was funny.
What's great, and it's something I think Wilder has done in other films, but this one particularly, is that he can do that stuff, but he's very smart about where it feels like winking at the audience in what way. With Raft, again, I feel, yeah, he's in on the joke in the meta way, and yes, there's the guy flipping the coin, but Raft never plays it as a joke. It never becomes Leslie Nielsen in Airplane. It never becomes I'm doing the goof on being a gangster. So he manages to carry the weight the film needs of motivating the whole story. And still, it's very funny. But what's funny is Wilder, the filmmaker, winking, not the actor winking. And I think where the film picks to have the actors feel in on the joke, and where the film has the actors be very real in their world, and it's the film that's laughing, is really an interesting thing through the movie. Because I feel like Wilder and Diamond were really very specific about who knows they're funny when in this movie. And I think it's really a big part of why it works so well. You know, what characters, like Joey Brown always knows that he's funny, and it lets us love him, and it lets us love the relationship with him and Jack Lemmon, and it lets us go, in some way, Hugh loves them to be together at the end of the movie, even in 1959. And I just feel like that's something that I felt like this time watching it, how much thought went into the actors' performances and where they are very real within an absurd situation and where they're not. And it seems like, yeah, if you deviated from that, you'd lose stuff all through the movie. And it felt much more deliberate. I hadn't just, when you watch a movie for one of these things, you watch it much more closely. And that was one of the many details I went, wow. Diamond and Wilder were clearly, scene by scene, thinking about who is in on the joke.
Was keeping the audience in on the joke, even with things like some of the, I don't know if they're necessarily double entendres or if they're just plays on words. Like at one point, one of them is looking at Marilyn Monroe, and basically they're about to say, oh shit, but they just go, oh sugar instead. Or the way that she's talking about how if she got caught with that flash, she'd be out on her ukulele, and using ukulele as this stand-in for her ass. And even the way that they shoot her. And one of the very first shots that we have is of her ass just walking down that platform, and just the way these guys are ogling and
Look at that! Look how she moves. That's just like Jello on springs. Must have some sort of built-in motor or something. I tell you, it's a whole different sex.
Or when Jack Lemmon's walking and he's not used to the skirt and the heels, and he's, oh, it's so drafty. And you're like, oh, you mean air's going all around, what would be your vagina if you had one. Yeah, it's just they don't say it, but it eventually you take the next step to where they're going.
Well, and there's also a lot of like sexual wordplay that, again, I caught it only more this time. The whole thing about getting the sweet end of the lollipop or the fluffy end of the lollipop. And I went, but the third or fourth time that is used as a metaphor, I'm like, wow, okay, this is really, it's very sexual imagery. I mean, especially the fluffy end of the lollipop. It's amazing how dense the writing is and how dense that stuff is. And how everything is so layered. The other thing that really struck me this time is that every character, just about at some point, is lying about who they are and pretending. From the very opening of the movie, where the mobsters are pretending to be funeral home people, that it's not just our two guys that they've created, and it's part of Wilder's wonderful comic cynicism, I think, in a way, is that it's not, oh, these two guys are doing this goofy thing. It's that in our world, everybody's always pretending to be something.
Even Sugar lies, right, to the oil billionaire and said, oh, I went to the Sheboygan School of Music or whatever.
And her claim that she was part of the Vassar thing and that everybody is misrepresenting themselves. And what's great in the film is that we don't dislike them for it, but watching the movie again, that's where Wilder's cynicism is. I thought of the movie, oh, it's a sweet, funny movie, and seeing it, it's sweet and funny, but it also, there's a lot of people lying and a lot of relationships built on dishonesty. And it's sweet and funny until you stop and really start thinking about it, going, wait a minute, is that? And the only honest character in the whole movie seems to be Joey Brown, who's like out of his mind and completely, I am who I am. And, oh, you're a man. Okay, I don't care. But he's the only one who never pretends to be something else.
It's almost like at that last line, even when I first saw it when I was a child, I always thought it meant he actually knew the whole time that he wasn't fooled, and he doesn't care. He really doesn't care whether this person's a man or a woman. He really likes them. So I always took that's why he's not surprised at the end there.
Which is, again, so ahead of its time. Most filmmakers in that era would have felt a need to make Joey Brown have this reaction of, oh my God. And what makes it so ahead, the whole film also ahead of its time, is at the end of the day, Joey Brown's like, I don't care. And you honestly believe he doesn't care. And you honestly believe it's like, great, you're a man. I still marry you. What a thing for a 1959 movie. How cool is that? And that's where the whole movie's been very cynical, and everybody's lying to everybody, and you are sitting there going, is it really okay that Marilyn Monroe and Tony Curtis are ending up together when the whole thing is predicated on a lie? But it's like, this relationship with Jack Lemmon is like, yeah, great. You guys actually are.
Yeah, it seems like he's falling in love with it. He feels special and loved, and he's, getting this great attention and security, right? Like, I love that line. Why would you marry a man?
Even after he reveals that he's a man to Joey Brown, it's just, you can look at either character. You can look at Joey Brown, who's just like super happy and just putting along in his boat, or you can look at Jack Lemmon, just that kind of double take. And then I swear there's a little, okay, I'm all right going along with this, because it's like you talk about the cynicism when he talks about, oh, I'll reveal to him after we get married that I'm a man, and then he'll have to pay me alimony for the rest of my life. I'm just like, wow, that is very cynical. And I don't think if he goes through with it that he would reveal or that he would get a divorce. I think he's okay with this. He really feels like he's embracing the feminine. It's so interesting. You've got like the parallel of Tony Curtis riding that bike, going to the yacht, wearing his earrings and forgetting his earrings until right at the last minute. And then it's the high heels that give away. Jack Lemmon never takes off those damn high heels at the end. He's running around. Great job, Jack Lemmon, running in high heels, running around, pushing that wheelchair and then running without it. I'm just like, okay, the one thing you forgot to do was take off those high heels. It feels like that would have been the first thing I would do. It feels like the first thing, if I was coming home wearing high heels, I'd be kicking those bad boys off and then taking off the bra. Their chemistry is so good. And that whole, the wisecracking one who gets the other one in trouble, the whole, we'll put this money on a dog. Trust me, he's a mutter, which of course brings to mind the whole Seinfeld thing of his mother is a mutter, his father is a mutter.
I'm telling you, it's a lock.
But it rained last night.
Exactly. This horse loves the slump. It's in his bloodlines. His father was a mutter. His mother was a mutter.
His mother was a mutter?
What did I just say? Come on, let's go up to the office. I'm going to call my bookie. Hey, don't tell anybody.
I love that he just keeps getting him in trouble, but it's Jack Lemmon who's the character of him. He comes up with the whole, that's okay, we'll just go and drag when it comes to needing that job because they are desperate. This is even before they get the whole mob thing. He's just so desperate for a warm coat in Chicago, which we all know is fucking freezing cold.
The seaside resort, which of course they used the Hotel Coronado down in Santa Barbara, California, which is nowhere near Chicago. I don't know how long it would take that train ride would take back then. Maybe like it's a 5-day journey or something, I think.
They're saying it's in Florida for this, I think.
As I was watching the other two films, I was trying to picture like how the setting of the resort changes things, or does it? So we've got the Alps in the German one, and then it's the French Riviera, right, in the French version. And we can talk about the other versions if we want to go there. And in this version, it's the seaside in Florida. And so you get scenes of people in bathing suits or versus people with a mountain in the background. It changes the nature of the backdrop of the story, which I liked and found very cool.
The whole thing of having go in swimsuits. And I love when Sugar is this, oh, you're so flat-chested. Everything just hangs wrong off of me.
It's just my tits are just so big that everything just gets caught on them.
Well, yeah, you're talking about how everybody is pretending to be something else. Even Sugar, like she changed her last name. Like she says what her real last name is. It's the Polish last name, but then she's going by something else. And then, yeah, to your point, Keith, too, as far as pretending to be the funeral guys at the beginning. And then later on, when the mob gets together, they are all pretending to be opera fans.
Well, Spats Colombo, if I ever saw one.
Hello, copper. What brings you down to Florida?
Oh, I heard you opera lovers are having a little rally, so I thought I'd better be around in case anybody decided to sing.
Big joke.
Say, Maestro, where were you at 3 o'clock on St. Valentine's Day?
Me? I was at Rigoletto.
What's his first name? Where does he live?
That's an opera, you ignoramus.
Where'd they play it? In the garage on Clark Street?
Clark Street? Never heard of it. Boys, do you know anything about any garage or any witnesses?
Us? We was with you at Rigoletto's. Hermes!
And yeah, that mobster at the end that you already mentioned, yes, does very much feel like a Lynch character. And I would not be surprised that if Lynch took this because it's Gordon Cole, right? We know Gordon Cole got his name from Sunset Boulevard, but Gordon Cole's hearing aid, that feels like it's right from this little Napoleon guy who his physical actions when he's raising up his hands and everything, I swear that they're making a Mussolini reference. He just really seems to be embodying Mussolini.
There very well may be, right? It still would have been very fresh in everybody's memories.
Oh, yeah, I agree. Mussolini definitely came to mind, and I don't think that's an accident.
And how funny is it, the anachronistic thing of Tony Curtis doing a Cary Grant impersonation?
Oh my God, it's just so funny. It's so brilliant. It's so funny that they let him do that. But that, I think, was great about Billy Wilder is I think he let people run with ideas that's if it seemed like it was working, he'd let it happen, right? Where it wasn't super controlling, it seemed. And I know Tony Curtis came up with that on his own. That wasn't a Billy Wilder suggestion. And it's just, what if I did a Cary Grant? And it always reminds me of that episode of Gilligan's Island. Did you ever see that episode where there's a beauty pageant? It's Mary. Everybody thinks Mary Ann is dying. So all the men pretend to be courting her to build her up and make her feel better. And the professor adopts basically the same Cary Grant accent that Tony Curtis is using.
Mary Ann, Mary Ann, Mary Ann.
Professor!
Just a minute. I've got a few more Mary Ann. But first, I want you to put these into a vase.
I see you've been down to the corral, too.
Corral? Why, my dear, you do have a sense of humor.
I can't help but think of one when I think of the other. And it's just such a good way of making fun of Cary Grant and his ridiculous, charming handsomeness of Cary Grant and that ridiculous accent that somehow worked so well and was charming and attractive anyway, even though, yes, it's very silly. Tony Curtis is a genius for thinking of that. That's so funny. And the fact that somebody would fall for it, the fact that Marilyn, or her character Sugar, is not going to see through that accent. She's just going to hear it and go, oh, that reminds me of Cary Grant. How fantastic.
I think Cary Grant was still not even Cary Grant at this time. He was still Archibald Leach in 1929 when this is set. Also, the genius of setting this in 1929 as opposed to 1959, you can do the whole, oh, things were different back then. Or, yeah, they could have gotten away with this. And also just bringing in the mob stuff and making it such a famous incident with the St. Valentine's Day Massacre.
Or the idea that you have all these costumes, right? Like it's actually a costume drama. And so the drag is another set of costumes in the costume drama as opposed to standing out very badly in a contemporary setting.
When you talk about Wilder, it's so easy to think of him as being very contemporary because so many of his themes feel like they're still with us today. It doesn't feel like you're watching something from another time. They just feel like they are with us right now. So you watch this and you're just like, okay, I'm not surprised about how sophisticated this comedy is. This isn't one of those things where you're looking at something 60 years old and being like, wow, I can't imagine they got away with that, or I don't imagine that they knew what they were talking about. It's, yeah, everything seems very much on purpose. But the one thing I am shocked by that they did get away with were some of those outfits that Marilyn is wearing.
Yes, the see-through. You can see her nipples in the yacht scene where they're making out. You can, yes. And she looks fantastic. She looks amazing.
And the super low cut back of the dress when she's running at the end where you see her butt. There's some of the most naked clothes. It's funny, there was just an article in the New York Times about this new trend of naked dresses and there was a lot of controversy about this new thing. And I think it's not that new. This movie, she is barely clothed. And I also think the 20s thing maybe helped allow them that too, because they're trying to make her look like, in quotes, a flapper, which of course she didn't really look at all. But it justified a certain kind of bangly dress that barely covers her body at all and is super sexy. She looks amazing. And I think if you get it in 1959, they probably would have gotten a lot more pushback on the way she was dressed, the way she was.
I don't think it would have been as sheer. I don't think they would have done it.
No, my God, the dress that she wears at the end when she's singing I'm Through With Love, there's just barely anything covering those nipples. And when she's running down the dock after she gets off the bicycle, I'm like, wow, she's moving. I see a lot of movement under that dress.
Marilyn herself is, obviously she's Marilyn Monroe. She's charismatic. She's on the same level as like Elvis Presley. Everybody knows who she is, but it's so easy for the mainstream average movie watcher to dismiss her as just she's almost not a real person. She's almost just like a painting. She's a symbol, but she very much was a real person who the reason her performances were so nuanced and fun is because she was personally a mess and had men problems. And so I really always felt like when she has that phone call scene where Tony Curtis is like, oh, I had to go marry the other girl or whatever, and her character's crestfallen, it feels like such a real moment, and you feel so bad for her, and you realize the whole movie has just been men trying to trick her into sex, that they don't give a shit about her as a person, that she's just this really beautiful woman who keeps getting manipulated, and she tells these stories about, oh, saxophone player, yeah, on this until this happens, and the next one comes in, and he does the same thing. And you just feel like this poor woman has been so abused and used emotionally, and here's happening again. But the hero of the story is doing it to her. And I can't help but get angry sort of on behalf of her character when that happens. And I know it's supposed to be a happy ending, but is it really a happy ending? Is that really a happy ending? Because he lied, and how are they? What's the conversation look like when they get off the boat? You know what I mean? That's what I want to know. I want to know what that conversation is like. So you're broke too, okay? And you lied to me, and
well, and I definitely felt that this time around too. That's where the cynicism is. And other than the Joey Brown And even there's going to be a reckoning, but it won't matter with them. But I had the same feeling about Wilder's definitely pretty cynical about love. And yeah, I have the feeling that I guess you could say, oh, they'll just end up together anyway, because now Tony Curtis had that one moment of saying, Wilder definitely has real question marks about men and women and love. And he always has in his film. There's always this thing of, yeah, even a happy ending in any of his movies is sort of kind of happy until you look at all below the surface. And that's part of what's wonderful about the movies. Most Hollywood comedies, certainly of its era, happy endings, we were really supposed to feel like, this is just great. And I think Wilder is always working on more levels. He's always working on happy with an asterisk. And are we happy if we're not honest with each other? Are we happy if we're living lives of pretenses? And it really struck me this time how much there was underneath the surface, and what you were just talking about in terms of Marilyn's character and how tragic she is and how sad and how real, again, that performance is, and that modulation of all this goofy silliness. And then, yeah, there's a couple of scenes with her where she's just heartbreaking, and there's nothing funny about it. And then he'll go right back to being funny as a filmmaker, but he allows these moments where if you as an audience stop, you go, whoa, this is awful. And that's, I think, part of what makes this a great film. Like watching a little bit of the French film, it's really fun, but there's just not other layers.
Nobody's pretending to be a whole other. They are pretending to be a woman at times, but when they're interacting with the women as men, they're actually being themselves, pretty much, right? Like they're not really lying.
And the film just doesn't feel like this is about more than it is. The French film just feels like this is about being a silly little movie about these guys dressing. Whereas with Wilder, he's turned it into this movie that's you can take it on the surface, but you can go way under if you want and look very deeply into relationships, honesty, sexuality, who we are, who we pretend to be, what we're supposed to be. There's a lot in this movie. And seeing it again, I was reminded how much is in this movie. And you don't have to go there if you don't want. And that's what's brilliant about him is he can make a film like this as just entertainment, but I think he does it throughout his whole career. He makes a lot of movies that, whether it's Sunset Boulevard or Double Indemnity there's like a surface level, and then there's a second level, and then and you can go down as deep as you want. And he's actually thinking and storytelling on really dark, deep levels, even in the lightest moments.
What a weird director too. Like I'm trying to think of a bad Billy Wilder movie, like a movie, not that it's not my favorite, but it's actually bad. I can't think of one. And like how many directors, even the good ones, have a movie that had their entire filmography is actually good or above good. That's so weird. Maybe Robert Wise. I don't know. But like everything from Lost Weekend, and so varied too, right? Maybe Vincent Minnelli had a varied career too, but he seems to be the only one who was consistently good.
Wilder, for me, doesn't get enough credit of being such a great visual stylist. You think of Sunset Boulevard is so visually striking. You look at Double Indemnity. We talked about that on this show. It's so visually striking. Even things like all of the people at the typewriters and the office stuff in the apartment. It is so well done. When I was in film school, we had to take apart the whole, like one scene from The Godfather, and I chose the murder of Sollozzo at the Italian restaurant. That scene is brilliantly directed by Coppola, but then you look at something like the murder, the St. Valentine's Day murder, and how those shots are put together and the way that shadow is being used. And I know he's probably playing off of a little bit of Hawks, and I think he had worked with Hawks or knew Hawks. I see that as being so visually striking, and so much of this movie is visually striking, even when it's like simple stuff like Jack Lemmon and Marilyn Monroe laying in the same carriage, and you've got those shadows going, and just the framing of them. It all looks so beautifully done. I love the way that they use feet and shoes to introduce characters. When you have a character named Spats, and that becomes his trademark when he walks out of the car and you see those spats, but then we introduce our characters with their high heels. We introduce Sugar with her high heels. We have so much stuff on the elevator where the elevator doors will open. I love to Wilder and Diamond and the way that they will bring up a joke and they'll keep playing with it throughout the whole thing, like the whole thing of type O as the blood type. Like that makes probably 4 appearances in this movie, and they use it in different ways and every single time. So smart.
One thing I noticed visually this time, and it's a subtle little thing, but it seemed suddenly very intentional to me. And it's not a showy thing, but is how much he always frames everything with Tony Curtis and Jack Lemmon as a two-shot. Whereas often Marilyn Monroe's in a single, often in a lot of other people are off. It's not like he doesn't use singles in the film. It's not like it's all, but those two guys are almost always shot as a team. And it's a subtle little thing, but I realized by the end of the movie, it's, oh, wow, very rarely are they in a scene together that it isn't a two-shot, which is an interesting thing about like establishing yes, these people are part of each other, like they're two halves of the same coin. And it's not something it's not showy, it's not like something you'd think about, but by about the 25th scene where it's, again, we're just holding a two-shot of the two of them. Everybody else is a single. I thought, oh, yeah, he's, again, thinking he's playing that 5-dimensional chess where it's not something the audience is supposed to notice. I haven't noticed it until I'm like staring at it now going, how do you shoot this? I'm going, oh, yeah, he made a choice that these guys are always part of it. And I think it's because they are two halves of the same whole. They're a team. And it's just interesting to realize, yeah, everything's very deliberate. He's very good in this movie. A movie like Double Indemnity or Sunset Boulevard, you're very aware of the filmmaking. You're very aware of, everything's thought out. But this movie has this kind of loose, relaxed, improvisational almost feel. And yet you realize it's not at all in terms of the visual grammar and in terms of everything still has a reason. Like every shot has a reason it's done the way it's done. And I always think that's really interesting when you see a great director hide a little bit what they're doing. But when you look close, you go, oh, it's still there. They're still making very specific choices. They're just not calling attention to them for this particular movie.
And yeah, the whole thing with Marilyn's performance, you could be very cynical and say they're shooting her in a single just because she was struggling with things. There's all of these stories about how rough it was working with Monroe. And yeah, he worked with her before and didn't really want to work with her again, but then finally embraced it. There's a TV show that I watch from the UK called Urban Myths. And it's mostly, the story of this is like drunk history, but not quite. And there was an episode, second season, first episode, Marilyn Monroe and Billy Wilder, It's Me, Sugar. And whole episode, 24-minute long episode, is all around one shot in Some Like It Hot where she knocks on the door or where she says, it's me, Sugar, and she can't get the line out, which is ironic because I heard about the part where she's looking for the bourbon bottle and that they had to keep like shooting that. And it was like, why didn't they just ADR her? But I don't know. But yeah, just all of these things. There was one commentary that I listened to where every single time the guy could make a reference to Marilyn Monroe and her real life, he would do it. And to the point where it's just, wow, this movie about Jack Lemmon and Tony Curtis is really about Marilyn Monroe. It was an interesting read, but it was just also kind of like, it felt almost like they were putting such a spotlight on her that she was burning up in the light.
I guess she really did have a tough time on that movie. But I think that's where so much of the nuanced, sad performance comes from, right? It's her. She was actually really having a really shitty day and that she had to act that scene. And so it came out and it was good. And I love the stories about her acting coach, Strasberg, being on. I guess she was paranoid about not having a good performance. And so she brought her acting coaches on the set, and instead of listening to the director, she would listen to what they thought of the performance. And I guess that really pissed Billy Wilder off quite a bit, as I imagine it would. But the fact that she was so concerned about her performance, and she sounds incredibly nervous. Let me put it that way. She sounds like a very nervous person who didn't have good days a lot of the time.
And that was the thing that, listening to some of the interviews with Lemmon and with Tony Curtis, and it sounds like she just couldn't even get out of her trailer a lot because she was so scared of having to go out there and do the scene. that the problem wasn't even doing the scene, it was just even getting her onto the set. But what I was also struck by, and yes, people can fake it, but I felt like there was a lot of empathy. I felt like with certainly both Lemmon and Curtis, it was like, yeah, she was having a hard time, and she was driving me crazy. There was a lot of sense of she was somebody that was in pain and was struggling. It wasn't like she was being an asshole or being mean. And I do think there's a real difference in probably anywhere in life, but certainly I've experienced it working on films. There are people who are suffering and are really having a hard time. And that's very different than somebody who's abusive or somebody who, and it sounds like she was never anything but sweet and wonderful to everybody else. She was just really struggling. And so I think there was a willingness to work with that and put up with that because she was doing brilliant work. And she was just in an awful, painful place. And I felt like the affection that people bore her felt very real when they were talking about her struggles. It didn't feel like internally they were rolling their eyes going, oh, God, yeah, I hated her. You felt like they loved her and but sometimes there's nothing you can do except just try to be supportive and be patient. But it never came off that she wanted to be problematic. It was that she really had deep, deep struggles. And I think it's why I think you can do it, Heidi, and I think it's true. It's like part of her brilliance was that she had all this stuff in her, and it's part of what she was allowed to be seen on screen. She maybe struggled to, but when she finally did let it out, and there's a lot there. Even in her silly scene, there's a lot of heartbreaking stuff that's going on. And I think it makes, they talked about originally this character was supposed to be Mitzi Gaynor, and you picture somebody who, again, didn't have that depth. And I just think it would have been a whole different movie and nowhere near the kind of wonderfully layered movie that it is.
Yeah, no, I think it would have been way more of a straight comedy with Mitzi Gaynor. There wouldn't have been that depth. Obviously, that makes sense. There is a depth to it that's so hard to quantify in any real way. It's just something you feel when you watch her on the screen. And I think it's what made her a star. I think so many people, she's a fantastically beautiful woman, and straight women love her. They love to watch her. I love to watch her. We want to, straight men love her and gay men love her. And it's like she appeals to everybody in a way, even though she's so over the top and beautiful and charismatic. But everybody still felt it and related. And I think that's what made her a star, really. And I don't know if she was like that in real life. I don't know if you met her in real life, if that's something that came off. Maybe it did. I don't know. Or if that was something that she was just really good at projecting when she was on the screen. But it worked so well that I can't imagine Mitzi Gaynor in that role now that Marilyn did it. No way. No way. No offense to Mitzi Gaynor, but
she's got that innocence, that hurt child kind of thing that comes through her very telling speech where she talks about how stupid she is and she keeps tapping her brain, nothing up here kind of thing. And then she'll give us a musical number, like especially the number at the end where you just feel the hurt coming through her. She's just been dumped by the millionaire and really feels awful about everything. Her singing is enough to make Tony Curtis, who has been such a dog through so much of this movie, change his heart. He actually is the most dynamic character in this, that he has this change of heart. He's like the saxophone player that will pick up a woman whenever he needs to. You get a little bit of that when he's going through, he and Lemmon are in that place where it's all of the talent booking and all of the secretaries know who he is and definitely have had a time or two with him. And then I love this kind of turnabout when you get the horny bellhop who's just hitting on him constantly. And you're like, okay, get a taste of your own medicine here, doll.
What's the line that Jack Lemmon says where he's complaining about getting hit on? Or he's like, I just got pinched. I'm not even pretty. And I got pinched. He can't believe how men act. I'm not even pretty. Like, what do the pretty women deal with?
One thing with Marilyn that I'd be curious if any of this was added to the script. I don't know if Diamond and Wilder ever made changes around somebody. The thing you brought up about her saying, I'm not smart, which is so heartbreaking. And there's on the Criterion version of this, there's a radio interview that Marilyn did with Dave Garroway sometime after this movie. And every time he says, "You're very smart," she's like, "I'm not smart. I'm not smart." It's like almost right out of the movie, except it's not funny. And you realize that was obviously a thing for her, that she, on some level, wanted to be taken very seriously as an artist, but was almost afraid that people would realize that she was so smart. Because clearly she was. She was doing very interesting, complicated stuff. You don't go to those places without having a lot of native intelligence. But yet she was really seemed almost threatened by the idea that somebody would think she was smart. And I wondered if any of that part of the character came out of something that was her and not just something they had happened to write written beforehand. I wonder if early drafts had that. Because clearly for her, it was a thing of both wanting to be taken seriously, but almost being terrified of what would happen if people did realize how deep she was.
The character of Sugar is almost like a cartoon version of Marilyn. It's the same trajectory, the same pain, the same beautiful woman. She's just not a movie star in this story.
I heard on one's commentaries that Joey Brown is only on screen for 6 minutes total.
Oh, really?
I don't know if that's true because it feels like more, but he brings such amazing energy to the role. I wonder if Jim Carrey is going to play Joey Brown like the biopic now because he's starting to look a lot like him.
Oh, God. Yeah. Yeah.
Joey Brown's rubber face. I remember him in a movie called Fireman Save My Child, I think it was. He was so good in that. He just brings this expressiveness to it. And his whole thing of mama. And I'm just like, how old is your mother if you're just this beholden to your mother? And I talked to with mama and we're going to wear her dress. We're not built the same way. I love that ending. I know I'm jumping way ahead, but that ending, just the quick responses that he gives and how they have the rhythm of that scene. We'll adopt. I forgive you. And just all of that stuff going back.
Have it altered. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's so great. And then nobody's perfect. One of the best lines of a movie ending ever, I think.
I called Mama. She was so happy she cried. She wants you to have her wedding gown. It's white lace. Yeah, that's good. I can't get married in your mother's dress. She and I, we are not built the same way. We can have it altered. Yeah, no, you don't. That's good. I'm going to level with you. We can't get married at all. Why not? Well, in the first place, I'm not a natural blonde. Doesn't matter. I smoke. I smoke all the time. I don't care. I have a terrible past. For 3 years now, I've been living with a saxophone player. I forgive you. I can never have children. We can adopt some. But you don't understand, Osgood. I'm a man. Well, nobody's perfect.
And the Indian remake.
Oh, yes.
Keeps that line at the end, which seems really
so funny.
Really out of place because right before it, there's like an extended Shaw Brothers style like fight scene, but like bad version of the Shaw Brothers fight scene with all the special effects. And the fight scene goes on and on. All of a sudden there's a fight scene with people punching each other and karate chopping each other and jumping around. And it comes out of nowhere, to be honest. And then they cut straight to the end romance. Oh, nobody's perfect. And I was like, what the hell did I just watch? This is something else.
I love that movie embraced the farce so much that they actually had the whole we're running from one room to the other hallway shot thing. That's like classic Scooby-Doo for me. And whenever I talk about like French farce, I always think of that particular thing of running from room to room. And they get there with the chase at the end. But again, there's a lot more danger to it, it feels. I know those Indian gangsters were not to be messed around with, but just that you've got all of the stuff happening, like when they bring all of the stuff with Spats back into this film, and I love the way that that's introduced with the compact mirror, and that's how Lemmon finds out about it. It's so smart. Yeah, I really like how all of that plays, and that they're a witness to a second murder. Like they are under the table when the cake pops open. And I love we see it all the time now with gangsters where it's just this, they are gangsters, but also they're people. The whole thing of don't ruin that cake. I want to take my son a piece. I love those little things that they put in here.
No, the end is really funny, and the cake scene is really cool. And the fact that they do witness the second murder is hilarious.
And then pop out from under the table. I'm like, guys, stay there. This is not the time. Yeah, and just everybody else in the room standing or sitting around, and then you've got all the dead gangsters at the one table.
And then the fact that there's all this other stuff going on at the hotel. There's just been a massive shooting, and everything's going on as usual. There's no cops coming in and out. And then when they're wheeling out the body of one of the gangsters, and then Lemmon and Curtis jump out from underneath, and that gets a scream from somebody. Not that there's a dead body of somebody who's just shot being wheeled through, but the two guys were under, which again, I don't think was some mistake. I think it was he was much more playing with what are people freaked out by. The other thing I noticed is, again, the little weird detail things, like even the signs in windows are really funny, like when the street scenes. I wrote down there was a couple of like in the background, there's a thing saying money to buy everything or something. And stuff that you just can, again, there was clearly such detail work going on everywhere you look. I mean, there's the obvious ones like the mozzarella funeral parlor, but if you watch those early scenes and everywhere, there's like just somebody was thinking about, and I assume it was Wilder or the directions he gave his art department. Everything is, if you frame it, you could find something funny or odd or weird or not quite real life and not supposed to be real life in the frame, which I love.
That funeral parlor, I don't think that's Paul Frees as the Mr. Mozzarella, the funeral parlor owner. Definitely his voice. Yeah, that was great to hear him. And I'm curious what you guys think as far as Tony Curtis's voice whenever he does Geraldine.
Well,
is that ADR?
Yeah, it's Paul Frees. I mean, it's very recognizable. Curtis claims it was a mix of Paul Frees and himself.
Wait, Paul Frees did Geraldine's voice?
Oh, yeah.
Well, you're kidding me.
No. Oh, yeah. No, it's actually credited, I think, in places.
I've never heard that before in life.
I've never heard of that either.
Yeah, no, the high-pitched voice.
Yeah. I thought, yeah, that one.
Yeah, that's Paul Frees. Now, Tony Curtis says it's Paul Frees mixed with me in the mix. They use some of both. I hear Paul. It's one of the only things that bugs me in the whole movie is I hear Paul Frees like basically almost the whole time. The rhythms are much more Paul Frees to me than they are Tony Curtis. I'd be curious how much of Tony Curtis's was actually mixed in. Also, at that time, sound mixing was nowhere near as sophisticated. So the idea that they blended the two voices is, they might have grabbed a line here and there that was Tony Curtis. But
that's insane. I mean, I feel like I should have known that, and I had no idea. I just assumed that was Tony Curtis. Wasn't that Tony's voice was wasn't good, didn't work?
Yeah, he said in an interview, he said he just couldn't do the falsetto really well. He said it didn't come out right. And he said, so we had to come up with something, and then they got this. He said, they got this great voice actor. I don't remember his name, but they got this great guy, and then he did a lot of it, and they took some of mine, and they mixed that in, and you could see he was a little defensive about it, but I actually admired the fact that he did acknowledge it. He did acknowledge that he couldn't get the falsetto to work quite right. I don't know, for whatever reason, I think I recognized Paul Frees because he was also a voice in every cartoon when I was a kid.
Yes.
So I had gotten to know his voice really well.
And the Haunted Mansion, yeah.
When hinges creak in doorless chambers, and strange and frightening sounds echo through the halls, whenever candlelights flicker, where the air is deathly still, that is the time when ghosts are present, practicing their terror with ghoulish delight.
It's one of the only things that in the films always bugs me from when I was a little kid, because I always went, oh, that's not Tony Curtis. That's that guy I hear all the time. And then as a grown-up, I realized, oh, that's Paul Frees, because the rhythms are just slightly different.
I'm never going to be able to unhear that now. Like, no, but that's good. Paul Frees deserves the credit, Like, I'm really glad I found out. And all the listeners just found out, probably.
in all the stuff that I was listening to and reading about, I did not read that. But yeah, I'm seeing a story right now all about it. So I'm just like, oh, okay, great. That's wild. I just did not know that. I heard his voice for the funeral parlor director because yeah, it's very. We did all so many Rankin and Bass specials and Rocky and Bullwinkle, and yeah, I grew up with him in my ear as well. So just okay, yeah, I did not hear that for Josephine. That is wild. And it's so funny because Curtis, I knew Curtis more from when I was growing up, and it was older Tony Curtis. And I honestly thought for so long that he was gay just because of like I think it was probably the hairpiece, the very obvious hairpiece he would wear. And he was just very fey sometimes. Yeah. And there was like the controversial line in Spartacus and stuff all about the snails.
Do you eat oysters?
When I have the master.
Do you eat snails?
No, master.
Do you consider the eating of oysters to be moral and the eating of snails to be immoral?
No, master.
Of course not. It is all a matter of taste, isn't it?
Yes, master.
And taste is not the same as appetite, and therefore not a question of morals, is it?
And I was like, oh, that's funny. They're playing on his homosexuality or bisexuality. But he looks great. Josephine definitely is better in the looks department, but I think that makes it even funnier just with the way that Daphne embraces the femininity. And because I love the whole scene, the cutting back and forth on the yacht where Marilyn is trying to help out the millionaire. He's just got that problem. He can't get it up anymore, that they're dealing with inability to gain an erection and just really playing with that. And then cross-cutting with that with Joey Brown and Jack Lemmon tangoing till dawn, blindfolding the orchestra and just going back and forth the way one dips one and then one dips the other. The music in this movie is so smart too, and that you hear the strains of that mambo coming up in other parts to kind of like remind you of that. Having an all-girl orchestra where it's like they're all singing by the sea and things like that. I'm just like, this is really, really smart the way that the music helps really cement what the story's doing.
I love the fact that all the versions are a musical, which is good. So the music is better. And so I like the music in the French version. I thought it was good. But I'm more of a fan of the 1930s than I am of Germany in the 1950s. Let me put it that way. And I found the music in the German version a little more dull, a little more restrained. And then the music in the Indian version is off the wall. I'm not sure that I understand that what happened in that film, but it's very exciting music. And Some Like It Hot has the most produced, played, crafted music, I think, of all of them, of course.
Why don't we go ahead and take a break, and we'll be back with an interview with Noah Isenberg, who's got a new book about Some Like It Hot coming out in 2026, and we'll be back with that right after these brief messages.
Looking for something superior to streaming? A place with more than 5 times the selection available on all of the other streaming services combined? Check out Scarecrow Video's Rent by Mail service. Select from an unparalleled collection of over 150,000 films and get Blu-rays, 4Ks, and DVDs delivered directly to your door. Get in on it now at scarecrow.com and rediscover the wonders of physical media.
Noah Isenberg, I am so happy to have you back on the show. I know last time we talked, you mentioned that you're writing a book about Some Like It Hot, and I'm so curious. Let's talk a little bit about that. Tell me why this film, of all films to write about.
Oh, I have long been a fan of the great Billy Wilder. I edited and introduced a collection of his early journalistic writings that gave us a pandemic project. I did this with the translator, Shelley Frisch. And already at that time, I was commissioned to do this project. I'm wrapping this one up, and then I'll do a short interpretive biography of Wilder. So I, as my better half calls this phase of my life, she says, these are my Wilder years. So I'm enjoying my Wilder years. And Some Like It Hot, there are other Wilder movies that I love as well. I'll be the first to point to Double Indemnity or Sunset Boulevard or even 1, 2, 3, which is a really caustic comedy that I think is not known quite or appreciated quite as much as some of Wilder's other work. And we could go on and on from there. But Some Like It Hot just had a certain appeal for me, and I'll try to explain as best as possible why. For starters, I think that this is a film that brings us back to Wilder's early days. It's Chicago, 1929, Berlin, where he came of age, Weimar Berlin, interwar Berlin, was frequently known as Chicago on the Spray. So I think that this was a chance for Wilder to tap into some of his youthful reflexes and what he experienced during the jazz age as a young man in Berlin, attending he was traveling with the Paul Whiteman Orchestra that brought him to Berlin in the first place. He'd spent his earlier years in Vienna. Prior to that, a few years in Krakow with his family. He was born in the sticks, born in the today formerly Polish, now I believe Ukrainian town, but anyway, at that time Polish town of Sucha. And so this was a chance to allow me I'm a film scholar, and that's, I guess, the way that I would, if I had to ID myself, that's what I do. I'm a film historian, film scholar. But I really began in German studies, and I began studying specifically that storied period between the wars, the Weimar Republic. And so this was a great opportunity to revisit some of that material and to then turn it on a reappraisal of the film itself. Among the different things that I've done in the past several years when working on this project is also to spend a good amount of time with Is Diamond's unpublished memoirs. I.A.L. Diamond, Wilder's collaborator. They'd worked a couple of years prior on Love in the Afternoon. This was their second collaboration, a collaboration that would extend another decade and a half, all the way up to Buddy Buddy in the early 80s. But Is Diamond is a fascinating figure as well. And so I really felt that I wanted to give him his due. And so I spent a lot of time not terribly far from where you are. I guess it's all relative, but in Madison, Wisconsin, the wonderful Center for Theater and Film Research, they have a copy of Is Diamond's memoir, which I really encourage folks to read. And in preparation for the book, I also interviewed Is Diamond's son, the TV and screenwriter named Paul Diamond. And I've been in touch with him periodically over the years. It'd be so great for that memoir to be published. It needs work. It's still a diamond in the rough. No pun intended, but I guess that works. Wilder, he's a big personality, no doubt. He was known for his gift of gab and his ability to offer a quip at pretty much any moment in time. And in fact, Diamond even writes about this in his memoirs. He says the difference between a writer and someone who's able to offer those quick gags. Diamond was much more of a sedentary figure. He would sit at the typewriter and bang at the keys, and Billy would pace in the room that they occupied on the Goldwyn lot, and really drove a number of his other collaborators to distraction. Famously Raymond Chandler, but I think also the Brackett years, when they ran their course. I think Brackett, who did his best to keep up with Wilder's pace. It was hard in the end. Diamond was a great match for him in that regard. And he was much more the scribe, so to speak. And another thing that was very, very important to Wilder, and this is true on Some Like It Hot, it's true of the full decade and a half collaboration. Am I doing the math right? Yeah, more or less decade and a half collaboration between Wilder and Diamond. And that was that on the set, Diamond, again, the sedentary one in the relationship, would sit there almost the way that formerly known as a script clerk and then later more grandiose term, script supervisor, would do on set. In the case of my other great hero, or somebody at least who occupied many years of my life, Edgar G. Ulmer, was his wife Shirley, who would serve basically that same purpose. And in many respects, this was a marriage. And I'm not talking about Shirley and Edgar. I'm talking about Billy and Is Diamond. And so a big chunk of the book also talks about the happiest marriage in Hollywood, which is the marriage between Wilder and Is Diamond. In addition, it gave me the chance to focus on the kind of sexual and social mores that are brought to bear in that film. I'm a cisgender straight guy, and so I want to be very, very respectful and tread lightly and handle as gingerly as possible some of these occasionally explosive topics. But I think that Wilder and Diamond handled the question of cross-dressing in a very comedic vein, which is eminently appropriate for the two people involved. But I do think, and my predecessor, the person who's really written the gold standard, I think, in terms of Wilder biographies, Ed Sikoff, he's very good at also correcting the record, so to speak, and making it clear that the film really was radical in speaking to a queer audience at that time, queer before queer was even the nom du jour. Anyway, and so I wanted to focus on that, and this again brings me back to the Weimar years and to Billy's experience in Berlin of the 1920s when he himself was in his 20s. There was a wonderful drag performer by the name of Barbette, and Barbette was the person that Billy brought in to train Tony Curtis and Jack Lemmon in the art of drag performance. But I felt that it was incumbent upon me also to tell, just as I attempt to do with his Diamond, give him his due and tell a fuller story about his biography, his professional career trajectory, his life in general. I do the same with Barbette, who was born Vanderclyde Broadway, born in Texas, in a town called Trickham. That's the way it's pronounced. It's a fittingly named town for somebody who was a great disguise artist, just as Jack Lemmon and Tony Curtis are in the movie. And so I wanted to follow Barbette's career. And with Barbette, I need to, in terms of this moment where we're still, I think, struggling over which pronouns to use and how to use them. And with Barbette, when I'm talking about her, I'll use the she, her pronouns. And when I'm talking about Vanderclyde Broadway was the given name at birth, I use he, him. But there is definitely some slippage, and there's plenty of slippage and fluidity in the movie. So I feel like it's true to form. But in the book, I chronicle also Barbette's career trajectory from a circus performer and trapeze artist to one of the great drag performers in Europe, somebody who cast his, or in some cases, when in full dress, her spell on a number of writers and intellectuals of the period, including Jean Cocteau. And even there's a scene in Sang du Poète, Blood of the Poet, with Barbette. And Barbette was really a groundbreaking figure. The New Yorker in the late 60s, there was a writer by the name of Francis Stegmiller, and there's a wonderful, you can access the profile. And there are a number of choice citations from Cocteau, among others. But Barbette casts his, and when performing her spell on a really large swath of Europeans, performing in Paris, in Berlin, in Amsterdam, in London. And so I devote a section of the book to Barbette, also to Josephine Baker, who was enormously influential. And one of the things that, when I was working on the Casablanca book, I remember talking with, I conduct a lot of interviews for that. But this was with Andre Aciman, where he talked with me about what he called the structural absence in that movie. And he didn't mean to be overly theoretical or academic, but what he meant is that the Jews are all over the screen, but nowhere in the picture, because there's so many Jews who are cast as both sides of the camera, actually. But I go into great detail in that book. But in this particular case, with respect to Some Like It Hot, the question of blackness, there's a real structural absence there. There's not a black figure in the movie, but it's hot jazz comes directly from black jazz musicians and performers like Josephine Baker, were, I think, enormously influential in Billy Wilder's day. And whether or not he saw her performing in Berlin is unclear. It's not necessarily important. But he did write on a black dance troupe performing in, and I don't know whether it's the Chocolate Kitties or whether it was somebody else, but performing in Berlin in a piece that he wrote in the mid-1920s that was simply called Schwarze Girls, Black Girls. And this is not a derogatory term, it's simply the German term for black. In Yiddish, you'll hear sometimes that the term might be used disparagingly, Schwarze. In this case, it's just simply black girls. Given that the book came out in the wake of all of these, just from George Floyd to other hideous murders, and in the days of Black Lives Matter and the raging protests and all that, my translator and I, after long, heated conversations, we ultimately decided to keep that from the collection that we published at that time in 2021. I go into great detail, however, in the Some Like It Hot, in talking about that piece and what that meant for Wilder. So that was all very windy, occupational hazard of the academic. But what I'm trying to say is that the focus tunneling in on Barbette, to a certain degree as well, on Josephine Baker and other jazz performers. This gives me a chance to really take the context in which Some Like It Hot is cast and take it much more seriously, not just simply forming the backdrop, not simply giving Wilder and Diamond cover as to and an impetus as to why Tony Curtis and Jack Lemmon would ever dream of dressing up in women's clothing. Cue the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. So if you're fearing for your life and that the mob might be chasing after you, that'll do it. But beyond that, really focusing on the period, the torrid 20s, the roaring 20s, and hot jazz. I didn't do as many interviews for this book as I did for Casablanca, or We'll Always Have Casablanca. But the interviews that I did, I think were useful. I mentioned that I spoke with Is Diamond's son, Paul Diamond, just talking about his father and the relationship that he had with Billy. I also got one of the very, very last surviving cast members, one of the Society Syncopators, a woman who at that time was known as Gloria Tennis. Today, she is known as Tracy Moss. And I spoke to her from her home in Palm Desert. We talked about the work that she did with the Syncopators. She was a trained jazz harpist. And as I learned, and there's a piece that corroborates this from the period when they're filming in Coronado, and in fact, it's a statement by Jack Lemmon, that roughly half of the Syncopators were all jazz musicians. And Jack Lemmon credits one of them for teaching him how to simulate playing the bass. He spoke with a bassist. I can't give you the name of that Syncopator at this moment, but she helped. Anyway, in the conversation with Gloria, known at the time as Gloria Tennis, I also got to flesh out some of that aspect of being a jazz musician at the time, a female jazz musician, which was not at all uncommon. There were a number of touring bands. In fact, there's a scholarly study, a book called Some Liked It Hot, which is all about female bands of the period. Draw a bit on that. And then I spoke with a couple of jazz critics and interviewed them. I interviewed Gary Giddens, who's just magnificent on jazz. And we spoke about Paul Whiteman and about the question of cultural appropriation. These white, as his name implies, a little bit too much on the nose, but these orchestras, taking Duke Ellington's tradition, in a sense, showing other big band masters who were black and not white, and taking that on the road. So whether it was Benny Goodman or whether it was Paul Whiteman or others. And we had a really good conversation about that. And I wanted to handle that issue as well with respect and with the complexity I think that it deserves. And so that was a good conversation. With Ben Ratliff, I spoke with him. He really helped guide me. Ben Ratliff's a jazz critic for the New Yorker magazine. We happen to share the same agent, and I was lucky enough to get to him and have the conversation that we had. But other than that, it's not I guess as full-time writers might recall it, it's not a very reported book. It's not, I think some 24 or so, maybe more interviews for the Casablanca book. You're really just a handful. I'm really drawing on otherwise on extant sources, in some cases unpublished sources, is the case, for instance, of Is Diamond's memoirs, and just trying to dig deeper and deeper. And so it is tricky when you're dealing with these beloved movies. And I love that's then the subtitle of the Casablanca book is Hollywood's most beloved movie. A little bit of publicity there, the work of a publicist. But when dealing with these beloved movies, of course, there's been so much ink spilled on them. So I'm used to this. When I first was a graduate student at Berkeley in the 1990s and decided to write a dissertation and chose to write, in addition to writing on film, and a chapter devoted to the 1920 film, The Golem, this was the third iteration of The Golem. But I also wrote on Franz Kafka, and oh my God, has ink been spilled on Kafka. On Walter Benjamin, he was a very important philosopher critic, and tons of ink had been spilled on him. So I'm used to that. In this case, what I would do is, and this was true of the Casablanca book to a large extent, was really to recognize and give due acknowledgement to those who came before me, but then try to put it into my own and give it my own kind of accent, my own flavor. Maybe drawing to that, I don't mean to be overly literal about that, but maybe drawing a little bit on the famously accented Billy Wilder, taking his lead. So that's really what the book is about. It ends, and that's the piece that the chapter that I'm wrapping up right now, just fleshing out some sections of it before turning in the entire manuscript. And that's on the Broadway show, which is now touring and has been playing in major cities recently, I think Houston, Fayetteville, Arkansas. And I got some really interesting responses on that. And I saw it here when it was on Broadway at the Schubert back in 2023. There were previews in 2022, opened in late 2020, I think December. I happened to be there the night that one of the producers, none other than Mariah Carey, was there, which was fun. and have her come out and talk to the audience afterwards a bit, which was, as you can imagine, lots of fanfare, big surprise. And then I went back again with my then 14-year-old, who's a performer, who's at the LaGuardia High School for the Performing Arts here in New York City, as well as with my wife, just to see it one more time. But I focused there on this is a topic that comes up in the Casablanca book as well, the afterlife, the enduring impact of what I would like to call the great American sex comedy. So in that chapter is sex comedy for the ages, and how it speaks, and how it's been modernized, of course, by the great talents that were involved in adapting it to the stage in this latest iteration. Of course, I go back to Sugar from the 1970s, another adaptation. I go back to the very short-lived and ill-fated television pilot that they did. So I spent some time, in some instances, for the television pilot, there's a Farsi adaptation, there's a Hindi adaptation. I go into some of these as well. For some people, it'll be really nothing more than a curio and whatever, trying to be as thorough as I can. But in some cases, as in the stage play, the Broadway show, and now traveling a show, I think it's got a lot to say to us today, especially when we refract Some Like It Hot through a 21st century lens and thinking about it. Some of the things that I think Wilder and Diamond were intimating, the latest iteration really brings to the 21st century. And I'll see if I can render that a bit more clearly. But in the final script note, when just after Joey Brown utters arguably one of the famous final lines in motion picture history, "Nobody's perfect," there's a script note that says audiences may not be ready, essentially, for what might occur at this scene. Essentially, this is it's played for laughs, no doubt, but in a very concrete way. It's kind of a meditation on gay marriage a good half century before we were talking about gay marriage. So the Broadway revival takes that much, much more seriously. And it's also, it's a mixed cast, which I think is fascinating. And I think, look, were Wilder free to do, he might have done that at the time. I don't know the kind of commercial and industrial constraints that he faced, and I don't mean to let him off the hook necessarily. But while there are in his other films, I think, for instance, of Double Indemnity, you do have, of course, Black characters, but they're playing the usual characters that they're consigned to. So for in this case of Double Indemnity, we've got the guys who are cleaning up at the office, and you've got the man who's, I can't remember the name because Fred McMurray refers to him, uses direct address, but the guy who's going to wash his car as a means of covering for the murder that McMurray's about to commit, making sure that he's accounted for, right, at home and not actually out there committing the murder with Barbara Stanwyck. I know, and I know this from Wilder's own writings and various comments, and boy, did he give lots of interviews over his multi-decade career. But he was very, very taken with Black culture. The great talents who were involved, from the choreographer to those who adapted, who wrote the book, Matthew Lopez and Adriana Hicks, I think it is, to Mark Shaman and Scott Whitman, who composed the music and provided the lyrics, respectively. They collaborated the lyrics, and Shaman wrote the music. Through the whole thing, the producers and so forth, I think they do justice to the film. You're always going to have these sort of the impulse, the invidious comparison between that beloved movie and what's done with it. And in fact, I managed to get a great, this is not an interview, it was actually, in this case, it was an email exchange with Stan Brooks. I actually interviewed him for the Casablanca book. Stan Brooks is a writer-producer who went to AFI in the early 1980s. And he gives me an anecdote from around 1980. When he was there and Wilder came, as he'd done before, he came with Diamond before as well. Anyway, he's there on his own, and somebody asks him about remakes. And Wilder says, there's so many movies that, for all sorts of reasons, turn out to be really just bad, awful. He said, remake those. He said, leave the classics alone. So he wasn't exactly, and look, I think it's this Stephen Bogart, Humphrey Bogart's son, who said about but this is about not remaking, but colorizing. When there was the colorizing phase, colorizing Casablanca, he says, you may as well put arms on the Venus de Milo. I think Wilder felt similarly about this, but at the same time, I really think it's a respectful and a loving tribute to the original. And so, anyway, that's now you get a sense of where my head is because I'm just finishing up those last sections. But the book tries to cover it all. I deal with the principal cast members, so in a chapter that for now at least is called Ménage à Trois, which is about obviously Marilyn Monroe, Tony Curtis, and Jack Lemmon. I deal with all the supporting players, and as I mentioned to you, the interview with Gloria Tennis, now Tracy Moss, but Gloria Tennis, as she was known there, the jazz harpist, who has a very minor role in the Syncopators, but she's thankfully she's immortalized in photographs that were taken, production stills, so I'm able to include that. You see her on screen a few times, very, very briefly. She says goodnight to Jack Lemmon when they're on the Pullman train. That's all she says, goodnight. And then there's a string of inaudible words that she makes when Tony Curtis discovers all the women, sort of the tribute to the Marx Brothers, when they're all in the upper berth on the Pullman train. And she says something, they're drinking Manhattans out of those little Dixie cups. And she says something, but it's inaudible. I've listened to, I've gone back and forth. But anyway, in the section on supporting players, I even deal with the most minor of characters. The waiter at Mozzarella's and at the Speakeasy, the Randy Porter at the Seminole Ritz, who likes them big and sassy. All of that. I just try my best to, I don't want to belabor it. That would be boring. And that's an important dictum of Wilder himself that one should adhere to, which is never be boring. So I try I gotta, and we'll see, I'll be working with my editor and others on that. But the idea is to render it with the due complexity, but also with the levity that the movie is. It moves at such a rapid clip, and there is so much buoyancy and levity to it. The last thing I want to do is give you some ponderous academic musings on this movie. So that's something I try self-consciously to avoid. But I do want to talk about some of these characters who are on the margins. And so I do that while, of course, also talking about from George Raft to Joey Brown to George E. Stone, who plays Toothpick Charlie, to Nehemiah Persoff, who plays Little Bonaparte, to Billy Gray, who actually was best known for a comedy club that he ran on North Fairfax, and who, according to an LA Times piece that I found just not only hilarious, but also useful, Cantor's Delicatessen, just up the street from the old, something Comedy Box or something along those lines, Billy Gray's Comedy Box, something like that. He's been forever immortalized in a sandwich, open face, chopped liver sandwich. It's named after the club, which is great. Anyway, just digging up some of those details that I think are, they're salty. There's some fun discoveries there as well. So that's the spirit of the chapter that deals with all the supporting players. And then of course there's a chapter that deals with the whole production and Mirish Company and sort of the move towards the independent outfits that were beginning to take on greater importance in the wake of the studio breakup and that sort of thing. So
what did you find out during your research about Robert Thorin and Michael Logan? I can't find very much about them.
Almost nothing. Michael Logan, I think and I don't know whether, by the way, that was a pseudonym because there's nothing. Thorin, there's something in Thorin. He was, I guess Thorin would have been the way that it was pronounced at the time, but Thorin, Robert, as it would have been written for Robert, he came to Hollywood, and he apparently was constantly getting in touch with Wilder about wanting him to take on what initially was Fanfare d'Amour, and then Fanfaren der Liebe, in both cases Fanfares of Love. And he, unfortunately, he died in a tragic accident before it even went into production. So much on Robert Thorin. And I don't know. My hunch at this point, Mike, is that it was probably a pseudonym. That was not at all uncommon. People would use a pseudonym if they were otherwise occupied doing something, whether they were journalists or whether they were who knows what. Journalists in the case of Wilder making that transition. He didn't write under pseudonym. The spelling of his name, of course, was different than Billie, until he realized once he arrived on these shores that tends to be a more feminine use of the name, so he Americanized it with the Y. But he was born Samuel Wilder anyway. It was his mom liked to call him Billy, apparently named after the touring show of Buffalo Bill that she purportedly saw here, not very far from where I'm seated, at Madison Square Garden, when she was visiting a wealthy uncle, staying with a wealthy uncle on Madison Avenue. Anyway, going back, sorry, to Michael Logan. I don't know. I haven't tried. Look, I did due diligence. I do a lot of work at the Deutsche Kinemathek in Berlin. In fact, I'm headed to Berlin next Wednesday. And I did my own work and even had a graduate student who was there trying to dig up more one summer, a doctoral student. She offered to spend some time there because I was unsatisfied with my own research that I did over a few days, and she happened to be there for the summers. And the work that she did, I got some really interesting stuff on the original Victor Victoria. And if I'm not mistaken, I think, so that was Reinhold Schünzel who did that, but I think Turin had a hand, if I'm not mistaken. I know that Kurt Hoffmann did. Who directed the 1951, the Fanfaren der Liebe, the West German production, to which Wilder and Diamond secured the rights, and that ultimately adapted, yes, to a certain degree. They claimed that they didn't even really use the bones of that one, but they were exaggerating. There's more to it than just that they're both. Thankfully, they didn't. There were aspects of that production, for instance, jazz performers playing for a crowd in blackface. They weren't going to touch that. Good on them. There are other aspects as well that aren't coming immediately. That one in particular is I guess today the kids would say is cringy aspect that he and Diamond didn't choose to touch with the proverbial 10-foot pole. But they did borrow quite a bit. For instance, the shepherdess of her sheep, as Wilder referred to the woman who traveled with the Tiller Girls in Vienna, a piece that he wrote, which I think is also very much a sort of the initial germ for Some Like It Hot. But there's also in Fanfares of Love, Fanfaren der Liebe, in the Kurt Hoffmann, the 1951 West German production, there's also a sort of a Sweet Sue, precursor of Sweet Sue. And there are other ideas as well. So I always want to give credit where credit is due. And I've seen that film a few times. And it's no Some Like It Hot, but it's not bad either. It's playful. And Germany, especially at that time, in the immediate wake of the horrors of the Second World War, were not exactly known for comedy. I think it was Robin Williams who was interviewed by the Germans once and had the chutzpah to say, she said, why do you think that there's not so much comedy? He said, you killed all the best comics is what Robin Williams said, that dark gallows humor. But anyway, it's not a great movie, the Fanfare. But it did, hey, credit for planting the seed. And again, I do think that even earlier, when Wilder hadn't yet followed the Paul Whiteman Orchestra to Berlin in June of 26, when he was still working as a cub reporter in Vienna, he covered the tour of the Tiller Girls. And the Tiller Girls, I think, are just, again, in terms of the sort of jazz age crazes, these traveling all-girl dance troupes were enormously influential and really all the rage, so to speak. And so many writers and critics and intellectuals, actually, Siegfried Krakauer, to give you a very famous example, wrote about the Tiller Girls. He wrote this piece called Das Ornament der Masse, the mass ornament, in which he talks about the sort of kick row of the Tiller Girls. And anyway, I think that's one of the early germs for Some Like It Hot as well. That comes directly from Billy, young Billy, Billie then.
Billy Wilder never let a good story stand in the way of truth, and I think Tony Curtis embellishes a little bit when it comes to his. What was that like, sorting through that?
I tell you, good training for this assignment was writing the Edgar Ulmer biography, filmmaker at the margins. That, as Lottie Eisner said of Ulmer, he was the greatest liar in the history of motion pictures or something along those lines. And she wasn't wrong. He really stretched the truth, just in the most audacious of ways. I think it was Bertrand Tavernier that said this is an interesting paradox here. Contradictory aspect of it was that it was the most outlandish of lies that he told actually turned out to be true, ironically enough. And it's the white lies that were often just, there was mendacity through and through. And Wilder definitely was, what is it when the man who shot Liberty Valance, once the fact becomes legend, print the legend, something like, I hope I'm paraphrasing that reasonably well enough. Wilder was such a great, and in fact, I one of the early profiles I did of him for the Los Angeles Review of Books years ago, 2011, I think. I talk about his when trying to summarize sort of his career, I talk about it as a raconteur cinema. He was just a storyteller through and through. He was a writer through and through, and that's really as he told a reporter. He told a reporter from Playboy in 1960, I think it was. 80% of any movie is the writing, and he saw himself to the bitter end as a writer. And in fact, his wonderful wife Audrey Wilder immortalized that on his tombstone. I'm a writer, but nobody's perfect. Is what his tombstone says. He was a storyteller to the end, and look, he would, I think, be the first to admit if it's going to get a better laugh, he'll stretch the truth as far as one can reach. So, I didn't see my role. I didn't see it as incumbent upon me to come somehow set the record straight. That would just be, again, it would be so dull and it would be so pedantic. It would be such the work of the academic who needs to, there's a great German term for it, the Besserwisser, the one who knows better. We would call it, I guess, a know-it-all in English. But anyway, Besserwisser. That's not the way I want to approach it. So if there's a great quote from an interview that he gives in Playboy magazine in 1960, I'm going to use it. And if that quote that he did, the same basic story that he gives, if he, in talking with Joseph McBride, who wrote a really solid biography, a biography I reviewed in The Nation when it came out, and I think is really great, very useful. I don't need to pull my punches here, but I think, as I said, I think in the piece too, Ed Sikoff's On Sunset Boulevard is still by far, I think, it's great. And I'll tell you, one of the reasons that Ed Sikoff's biography is so fabulous then and now is how eminently readable it is. It's so entertaining. It's true to its subject. And but look, I don't want to throw poor Joseph McBride. He's a fantastic film historian, one of the greatest film historians of the generation. But it's more of a scholarly study. And it's a book that came out at Columbia University. Goff's was for a trade press, for Hyperion is what came out in paper. But anyway, very different audience in mind when writing. And so if in an interview from the 1970s, when he's making front page with his diamond, if he tells the same story to Joseph McBride, who was then also a reporter, critic, writer, and it's better, I'll use that. But if it's in the 1960s, so I guess I gave myself a little bit of lassitude, a little bit of poetic license. And I take very seriously, I guess, the term, or at least I interpret it the way I want to interpret it, creative nonfiction, which is not to say that I'm like inventing stuff. That would be reckless, I think, and irresponsible. So I definitely don't want to go down that path. But if there's a great story and he's told it and it's in print or non-record or even in some of the unpublished stuff that I managed to dig up, I'll use it. Oh, I'm shameless. And by the way, I think that's very true to the spirit of Wilder too. He was all about, one of the wonderful pieces that he wrote as a 20-something is called The Art of Little Ruses, about how mendacity and that ought to be taught in school as a school subject. I don't know that I'd go that far, but I do think there is something, and so many other, whether it's Oscar Wilde or Mark Twain or others have talked about how we need to lie, cheat, and steal, and then incorporate it in a creative manner into the craft of writing. And so I'm simpatico with that. I don't want to be reckless and irresponsible and just making shit up, so to speak. But if I get a good quote, I'll use it. I have no qualms with that.
I know dates change. You're still writing, about to send this off to the editor. Do you have a date in mind when people can start looking for this?
Oh boy, the sooner the better. It will be out within the year, I think. I made it clear to my editor, it's not going to be an April Fool's joke, but I'm submitting it, which finally I'm hitting a deadline because I had to keep on postponing. And then I most recently said, I'm going to get it to you at the end of April. And now I'm like, you know what? I'm getting it to you on April 1st. We're going to snap into action here. So I think, look, this is my guesstimate, but this is not my first rodeo, and nor is it my first lap around the block with Norton. He's a great publisher, and I feel very humbled and delighted that I'm able to do another book with them. They're a great publisher, and my editor, Matt Weiland, is just superb. They don't come any better. I think probably a year is definitely an outer. I don't think it will be out in 2026. That would be very, very fast unless they decide they're just going to really want to get that thing into the hands of readers. I think my best guess for now, I think, is probably going to be early winter of 2027. The Casablanca book came out in February, and there was a little bit of a gimmick attached to that too, so that we could do, of course, the the annual Valentine's Day screenings of Casablanca and peddle some books that way. I think it's great to have it come out in winter. I'm not the only voice in the chorus here, because it will give a couple of different seasons in which to really push it. So we'll see. I wish I had more. I wish I turned the damn thing in a year or two. Had a few things get in the way, but anyway, I would say within a year is definitely a decent guesstimate for now.
Do you have a title? And again, I know this could change.
No, I'd love to give you a title, and I can't. And I don't mean to be cagey about this, but that We'll Always Have Casablanca. The story of that title is worth telling, and this is, I guess, a little bit of my dodge here, because I'm not going to give you a title. On that, I'm going to stand firm. But the title We'll Always Have Casablanca came from a 20-something who was early on in his career, Sam Mitchell, I want to say, who'd never seen the movie. Knew the lines from the movie. The lines just indelibly marked in our collective unconscious, or so, and are referred to. So whether it's Shocked or We'll Always Have Ferris, now We'll Always have. So anyway, I'm not going to give you a title, because who knows? It could be another. It could be someone in the mailroom who comes up with the title. And that's, especially with trade presses, this is one of the many, many distinctions between trade versus academic or university presses. And this is true about also writing journalism. The author does not have really much of a say when it comes to titling. And so they'll title it as they see fit. And I hope I'll like it. I'm sure I will. I liked what they did. And I think as my working title, that's what I will tell you. And I'm not going to tell you, be careful here with Something Like It Hot, but with Casablanca, I was using the name of the stage play that was sold to Warner Brothers and then adopted by the Epstein twins and company, which was Everybody Comes to Rick's. So that was my working title. And it didn't stick, and I think it's probably fine. I think it's a title I used for one of the chapters. So that's fine.
Noah, thank you so much for your time. It is always great talking with you.
Great talking with you. I really appreciate it. Thank you. This is and I will let my editor and agent know we're doing early publicity media blitz here.
We are back, and we were talking about Some Like It Hot. And Heidi, before we took the break, you were talking about the different versions of this, and I definitely want to talk about those a little bit more. You were talking about the Indian version, and thank you, Keith, for telling us about the Paul Frees voiceover stuff. I love that the voices, they're not even trying in the Indian version. It's just, these are women's voices. And of course, like the whole thing in Indian films where the songs that they're playing are not sung by the actors, no matter what you're watching. So that just plays into it even more. And having these like duet scenes where the voice sounds the same to me.
And the music's really energetic, and it's fun and it's silly, but it's one person's voice singing, whoever actually sung the song. But then there's 8 people singing in the shot. And so her voice sounds like everybody's voice sounds exactly the same, which is absolutely ridiculous. And I don't know why they didn't just have multiple people singing. So even if they're supposed to sound like women, great, but like women don't all sound the same. It's just very odd choice, but maybe it's supposed to be silly and ridiculous. Maybe they did that for comedy purposes, because it is very funny. They didn't try to make us think they were singing at all.
I don't know if it was in the German version, but for sure in the French version, the whole idea of we are flexible musicians, we will play anything and anytime, and this whole idea of the uncomfortable thing of them in blackface. Yeah.
Yes.
And some not very well translated subtitles there too. But they do that. They wear grass skirts. And I think they make mention of that in another one of these. Maybe it's I
think the German one. They do it. They do it in the French one for sure. And then I think they also do it to a lesser extent in the German version, but they do it. And they pretend to be Russian, and they can't quite keep up with how fast the music is, and they pretend to be Cuban. And again, they have some issues. I did kind of like the idea that they presented these characters as they'll pretend to be anyone. They don't care. This is just what they do. I thought that was fun, and that's something that we missed out on in Some Like It Hot, because we don't get that. We get they're willing to be women, but there's also that element of we're also hiding who we are from the mob. Whereas the other guys, it's more, oh, I can be anyone as long as I can play music.
They are just desperate for a gig. And I'm okay with them not doing that in Some Like It Hot because already we're at like 2 hours solid, but it's 2 hours that never drags for me. This movie just moves and is so well done.
For me, the sign of a really good film is I should be bored, but I'm not. I love that. That's the best.
Did you guys have a chance to see the pilot for the TV version?
I didn't watch the whole thing, but it seems like they took the mob story just one step further, and that the whole show was basically going to be about their relationship with the mob while they're dressed like women in a band. And I like the Tina Louise casting. I think that's really good. She's honestly, there's not a lot of people who have the charisma of Marilyn Monroe, but she comes pretty close as far as people go. And so I like her. And but it's basically just another version of the same story. What's her name in it? Candy. Her name is Candy instead of Sugar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a weird thing for me. So for the audience listening at home, so it's very funny because Lemmon and Curtis actually reprise their roles. It's basically, okay, we are going to get plastic surgery so that we can be on the lam and not have to worry about this, not have to dress up as women. So they show up at the beginning, they have a doctor and the doctor's assistant, and they go under the knife. When they have the bandages removed, they're Victimone and Dick Patterson. Then they get sent undercover. Spats had a twin brother, even though he doesn't look anything like Spats whatsoever. It's Suds Colombo instead of Spats Colombo. Anthony Caruso playing that. And so they send them undercover, and then eventually the doctor's assistant comes in and says, oh, those two musicians, they had their faces changed. Here's the new faces, and they're already back in drag. It's basically a redo of the movie, and you're just like, why did they get plastic surgery? They just ruined everything.
And it takes a long time to recover from plastic surgery. I love how in TV and movies, it's just a week later, they're unwrapping the bandages and they look like another person. I'm like, no, their face would be the size of a balloon for 3 months.
And you get Mike Mazurki reprising his role. Jack Albertson is the doctor. This is pretty good. Like you said, Tina Louise is Candy Collins, who is not Sugar, but she's somebody else, though she fills that role. And I'm so curious because, once they get rid of Studs, they go, oh, there were triplets. There's also Stripes Colombo. And I'm like, is that what they're going to do? If this was a TV show, are they just from week to week going to be on the lam from different Colombo brothers? It didn't feel like they were really thinking this through.
No, and I feel like that's why it didn't get picked up is because the executive had the same conversation we're having right now, which is just not sure where this is going to go. And obviously there's going to be the love triangle, like with Candy and the gangster, but how long can you ride that out in a show?
Problem with a lot of ideas is that they're just not designed to be done forever. In some ways, it's amazing that the movie does it for 2 hours and never feels like, oh, we've got the joke. And that's because I think it's brilliant. But I think trying to do the joke of being in this drag disguise, I just feel like it starts to become like we got it. And I think that's the problem with a lot of TV, certainly from that era, is that it's like it was great. It's a great thing, but what's great about it, what's great when you watch the movies, this is going to end. It's going to resolve itself. And that's part of what the fun is how is this going to work itself out? Whereas if you felt like, oh, the whole point is it can never resolve itself because then the show's over.
Then you get Gilligan's Island and you're like, oh my God, what now? What's going to happen next that's going to prevent them from leaving the island? And that also had Tina Louise. But I didn't do that on purpose. But this was also a time period when lots of successful feature films, often dramas, films that were being made into TV series because of their success, right? Like you have Heat of the Night. I'm like, and The Odd Couple, right? They did that with Odd Couple, and they would always not be able to afford the real actors. So Alien Nation even did that up into the late 80s, whereas we really want to do a version of this movie as a TV show, but without the people who are in it. So we'll cast replacements for them and we'll see how it goes. And it always felt like a weird thing to me to turn these movies into series when they're finite stories.
One of the most interesting ones for me is actually something that Keith was involved in, which is Fargo. How they tried twice. They did one where it was Kathy Bates as Marg, and just really tried to pick up on what was going on in Fargo the movie, and then to have the whole Noah Hawley thing where it's, I'm going to make a lot of references to these other Coen Brothers properties, not just Fargo. There's going to be references to any Coen Brothers you can think of, and it's going to be its own thing, and each season's going to be its own story, and some of them tie together. I think there are ties from every season to the other seasons. So smart and so well done.
I find that way more satisfying than just an endless sitcom version of a drama that goes on and on and on. Like the finite story thing. And that's something that I think has been each season devoted to a story. That's like not a new phenomenon, but I want to say new-ish in the grand scheme of television.
Oh, yeah. It's in terms of US TV, serializing a story, that was, when I was growing up, that didn't exist.
Yeah, where it's like you get these, it's okay, we know what the show has a certain tone and it's for a certain audience. And so instead of doing like a 1 hour and then it's done, we'll do a whole season and then it's done. And that story is concluded. And The True Detective, that's another version of that. I think that is just a really clever way to satisfy a longer story without never having an ending. Like, I can't imagine where the ending of the Some Like It Hot TV show, how would that end? You're going to, all of a sudden, out of the blue, one of the episodes ends the story. That's weird, right?
Yeah, I think it worked better with some of the times when it was character comedies. Like, I think The Odd Couple actually worked okay as a series because that film wasn't based on a cliffhanger or the dramatic thing of answering a question. It was just based on this funny relationship with these two characters. So that, I think, TV could do pretty well because it's just about these two people and what they're like. So you can keep exploring that. But the second it's about a dramatic question, you can only drag it out so long before it just gets stupid.
I wonder how many they actually did. But like they did Flamingo Road, right? They did, I mean, there's probably hundreds of these shows that some of them probably went nowhere. Some were on for many seasons.
Yeah, MASH, I think, but again, it made itself something new. It for its time, I think it all really changed in TV after cable came in and you were trying to get a smaller. That's what really happened was that cable can't happen. And then it was like, oh, we only need 10 million people or 5 million people to watch this. We don't need 50 million people. And so you could do stories that were more challenging. You could do stories that were more serialized. You could say to people, yeah, if you miss a week, you're going to be in trouble. You couldn't afford to do that when it was 3 networks because if you serialized the story, people missed it. And also with cable, they would rerun things a million times. With network TV, it was on once. So they couldn't afford to do a story where like, oh, if you miss an episode, you're lost. So that really was a huge change that allowed a different kind of storytelling in American TV. Europe had been doing it for forever, but in America where you had to have these enormous audiences, there was no room to have a story that you had to keep up with. But MASH, I actually think, arguably is as good or better than the film. And I think because it was one of the first ones where they said, we're not going to do MASH the movie. We're going to take MASH the movie and create something new that fits this medium, that works in this world. And that, I think, again, was not a TV. It was not a TV way of thinking. And I think that was really Larry Gelbart and some brave, smart people going, yeah, we're not going to just do MASH. We're going to jump off from MASH. And that allowed that show, I think, to be really quite brilliant. And it's funny, I rewatched the movie not that long ago, and I thought, it's aged. This is not as good a film as I thought it was when I was 17.
The stuff with Sally Kellerman really is very uncomfortable days.
Really cruel. It's really cruel. It's really sexist. It's really, and it doesn't feel like, oh, that's the point. It feels like, no, this movie in some ways is as awful as the people it's making fun of. And there was a lack of humanity in it that I was really struck by on re-seeing it a few years ago. I was like, whoa, I don't really know if I like this. Whereas with the TV show, I felt they managed to really make everybody human, even the bad characters, unquote, in MASH. We feel for, they're doing their best in their own sad way.
Frank Burns doesn't have a lot of redeeming characteristics, but then once they bring in Charles Winchester, there is such a humanity to him. When you find out about his sister who's got the stutter, I mean, the finale with the band that he's teaching Mozart to, that rips the heart out of you.
My brain is doing this thing where I can't stop it, where I'm thinking of TV series, like films that never became TV series, but that I want them to, but they would be terrible. It would be a terrible idea, like Dinner at 8, the series, or like Apocalypse Now, the series, like the half-hour sitcom version of Apocalypse Now. God, that would be fucking awful. But I'm so sad they didn't do that, so I can't go on YouTube and watch it, because I want to watch it and make fun of it.
A brilliant spoof series. The same way that the documentary Now was a great spoof of all the documentaries you grew up loving. I think doing a show that is, what would the series have been of these things? If you got the right people to do it, it could really...
That would actually be something entertaining that Saturday Night Live could do, is what if?
Hey, Saturday Night Live, are you listening? Because, no.
No, they don't listen. They just read off of cue cards. So we had Fanfare of Love in 35. We had Fanfare de Liebe in 51. We had Some Like It Hot in 59. And then we jumped to 5 years later, and pardon my pronunciation, Fistik Gibi Masala, which was a Turkish film, which was a black and white film, just like Some Like It Hot, these other previous films. Then we jump up to 70 and we have another Turkish version 6 years later, just called Fistik Gibi. And that one, I'm curious because it's only 1 hour and 11 minutes long, but man, oh man, they jump into the drag within literally 5 minutes. Like the opening scene is the murder, and then the drag comes like that. It is wild how quick it comes. And then another 5 years after that is The Runaways, the Indian film that we were talking about earlier, where, again, because it's an Indian film, you have to have these things like 35 years ago, our fathers were friends type of thing. Like we've talked about this on episodes before. And then we like, I wonder what our sons are up to. And then it's like, you go to the sons. Also color, just like Fistik Gibi in 70, not a really good idea to have the color unless you can do a better makeup job, because these guys, 5 o'clock shadows, are like third build in the cast, I think. But otherwise, I was okay with it. It is strange to see just with all of these remakes that happened after, and I say remakes very much on purpose because it feels very much like the two early films from the 30s and the 50s, 51, were very much kind of like, it felt like the 51 was a remake of the 35, but Some Like It Hot doesn't feel like a remake. It feels like a new adaptation, but then you see the exact same things happening in those other three films.
And they all have the mob story and
the mob story. You've got the guy in the bathtub who is wearing the wig, but then he stands up and he's got his full male clothes on. It's wild to see just how much Some Like It Hot informed these other three films.
I guess it's that old formula of hey, it was really successful in X country. Let's do another version in X country. The U.S. is notorious for doing that, right? But I love that it feels a little low budget. I love that you have these sort of, I'm not an expert on Indian cinema but what I would call these Bollywood style dance sequences and songs, this very specific style of music and dance. And it's just but it's also a trip. Like it's also an oddly made film, and it's very colorful. It's very, very much a film of the 70s. There's a 70s aesthetic that is impossible to ignore, but also it's India in the 70s, which is a very different aesthetic from, let's say, a Western country in the 70s in cinema. So it felt like a very exotic and silly experience for me, but I did enjoy it. I just don't know if I understood some of the choices they made. I'm not sure I need to understand.
No, in the earlier versions were musicals as well, in a sense, but this one is a musical version in a different way, which is great. And yeah, I'm like, okay, this kind of makes sense. And like you were saying, Keith, the whole idea of men dressing up as women for entertainment, one of the biggest Best Picture winners of me growing up was Tootsie. This is such a thing that we do in movies. This whole idea of
Shakespeare did it all the time. Because let's face it, gender and sexuality and who we are is one of those really prime questions. And it's always been fluid and complicated and rich. And you see it in ancient Greek plays. You see it in, it's something that dramatists have always wanted to explore because it's so central to who we are. And the gap between who we're told, you're a man and that's what being a man is, and you're a woman and that's just what being a woman is. And of course, the reality has always been more complicated and more fluid, and who we're attracted to, what we want to look like. It's one of those complicated, interesting things about human beings, and yet societies always try to narrow it down and go, here's the rules. And about something where there are no rules and can't be any rules. And so I think you see it all through history that people want to find ways to explore that. And I think there's a reason that drag, in quotes, goes back as long as there's been culture.
One of the reasons that Shakespeare used male actors often as female characters is because women were not allowed to be at that level of acting. Like, women could be in smaller theaters, they could be strippers, they could be prostitutes. But when it came to like actual acting that was considered a good job, that was reserved for men. Otherwise, I totally agree with you. I think that it's something that has been explored a lot in Shakespeare. And he does have a lot of stories about men dressing like women and pretending to be women. And it's very much, a lot of his comedies honestly remind me of Three's Company's episodes, to be honest. The other thing I want to say is I think that the reason we're coming upon this time where people are actually saying things like you just said, which is actually it is more fluid than that. Actually, it is a little more nuanced and it's not so black and white, is because we're finally at a place where women have attained pretty much what I would call equality with men. Like I feel, hey, I'm on a podcast right now with two guys and I feel like they're equal. To me, that's like my gauge of how sexism is affecting my life. So like I would say at this moment, it's affecting my life 0. That may change tomorrow, but I think when you have a society that's very rigid with gender and sexuality, it's usually because there's a hierarchy with men at the top, and you have to protect that. And when men, the whole reason it's funny to begin with, men dressing like women, is because it's shameful for a man to try to pretend to be a woman because women are lesser than men. And that's why that's why people are homophobic. Or it pisses people off so much when men do it, or it really pisses people off when when they're trans women, because people in the mentality is, why would you? They can't articulate it because it's so ingrained, but inside of them, what's really happening is like, why would you purposefully lower yourself and degrade yourself by becoming a woman? And there's a little bit less hate for women who transition to be men.
Absolutely,
because it's actually seen as, hey, you're getting up in the world. But I feel like we're at a place where we're at a fluctuating point where it's not like it was. Things are changing. Gender and sexuality are coming into this more equal world where we can say things like, hey, we don't know. And you might get a man like you saying, hey, it's fluid and we don't know. Or you might get a woman on a podcast talking about things as an equal with men. So I think that's all fucking fantastic. But I think in the past, there definitely has been.
But we're seeing the backlash about that right now in America. We're seeing, I think, to get political for a minute, but I think that all through human history, all the rules, racism, sexism, whatever, religion, it's all, a large function of that is to keep power in the hands of certain people. I mean, everything that we deal with and struggle with socially is all because there's a certain group saying we want to structure stuff so that, what happened to Christianity? Like you go from like Jesus saying, take care of the poor and then take care of the stranger, and to like this kind of now just using it to justify cruelty and tremendous hierarchy. And I think all societies are based on hierarchies because it's all somebody wanting to go, and by the way, I get all the money, I get all the power. Usually it's been men through history.
Historically, but that may not always be the case. And sadly, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but sadly, it might always be that someone is at the top because humans enjoy hierarchy. But go on. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
You're absolutely right. I think it's a really good point. I think it's a human trait that we are both drawn to and hate hierarchy. And it's one of the struggles because on some level you need some sort of hierarchy or you have complete anarchy. But the second you have a hierarchy, you also have a socially unfair and containing and constraining system, because it means people who don't fit neatly are going to always be out. You have white people coming in and taking over big chunks of the world, and then suddenly if you're not white, even if you were there way before anybody else, you're now on the out because somebody else has constructed the system so that you are now the lesser. And the problem is that's going to be a human struggle. But I feel like when you deal with, and you see it in art and literature, is people questioning what are those rules. And I think something like Some Like It Hot, that's what's great about those stories. Is it's doing it in a really fun way, but it's still saying, yeah, we all live by these rules. Do they make any sense? Are they based in anything? Do they do anybody any good? What harm are they doing? And I feel like that's what's so wonderful about art, is it can do it very boldly or it can do it very subversively and quietly. But I feel like that's kind of the function of art, is to go, wait a minute, we all accept this. Is that a good thing?
What you just said really made me think for a second about the movie and how the two different relationships are presented. The straight relationship, where you've got the man and the woman, she's very feminine, and when he's a man, he's very masculine, is based on lies.
He's still having problems with his erection, which is interesting.
That's true, yes. But it's based on like lies, and he basically manipulation. And then you have this other relationship, which is very unusual, and it's two men. One is dressed like a woman, but aside from being dressed like a woman, he's just being himself with this man that he met, and they're genuinely enjoying each other's company and having a good time. And that's the healthy relationship. I think that's a really interesting commentary that Billy Wilder made.
And you think about that 35 version, and we've talked about this on the show before. Last month, we talked about I Saw the TV Glow and the Wild Boys, so definitely all these trans narratives. And the whole idea of the overclass can imitate the underclass, and it's seen as funny. Whereas if the underclass impersonates the overclass, then it's a threat. So women dressing up as men, ooh, that's really how dare you kind of thing. But like these musicians in the first one, they go in blackface, and I think there's 2 or 3 guys in blackface amongst real black people.
Yeah, and I couldn't help but think, and I don't want to be that white bitch, but I couldn't help but think, like, how did that black guy feel when he was like, I'm in the background playing, I am black, and I'm a real musician, and I'm playing, and then there's this white guy in blackface who's the star of the show who's making fun of me.
Oh yeah, it was definitely uncomfortable and weird, but I think you're absolutely right, Mike, about it's who's allowed to joke about what is again part of the same. It's all part of the rules that get established by the people at the top. So those become the rules, and then people challenge them, and then there's a backlash, and it's the art class is always trying to break down the rules, and the ruling class is always trying to keep the. And I think forever probably there will be that battle between the artists and philosophers and going, wait a minute, these rules don't really work, and the people who benefit from them going, oh yes they do, shut up or we'll kill you.
Yes. And that's why art is so important. And look how we should be running the world. Look how smart we are. We figured it out.
It is really interesting because I'm thinking about what drag is on TV these days. And of course, since 2009, it's mostly been RuPaul's Drag Race and all the various incarnations of that. And the most controversial seasons or people that have been on the show over the last few years have been women who are going in female drag, because drag is you're not impersonating a woman. You're impersonating this strange blow up of a woman. You're bigger.
It's a cartoon. Yeah.
It's Dolly Parton in real life is a drag queen, basically. And I think she knows she's a drag queen. The women who are going in drag, also there was a trans woman who was going in drag. There was also one of the strangest things was there was a straight man who was going in drag, and that became like this big lightning rod. I was just like, okay, but yeah, it's so interesting to see. And then even how that has changed, and even how the TV show has changed over the years, just even with gendered language, because it used to be may the best woman win, and now it is may the best drag queen win. It is not we are impersonating women, we are drag queens.
Yes. It's almost like it's like people are a canvas and they're their own canvas and they're creating the art on themselves. That's how I see it. Because you're right, it's not impersonating women. It's something, it's like the way that I see these crazy fashion shows, like at Fashion Week or whatever. Sometimes it's totally normal clothes, and sometimes this is just an art installation. This is not meant for people to be wearing. This is like somebody's an artist and the models are their canvas.
And what's the ready-to-wear version going to look like? Maybe it might have a similar color or panel or something, but it's not the trash can dress with a meat skirt.
I love all this political stuff. To me, it's what's underneath so much of art and why we do what we do and what. But do either of you guys know about the original story? Because there's these two guys credited with the story on the French version. But as much as I could find out about them, one's an American and one's a German.
I couldn't find anything either.
Did somehow some company in France hire an American and a German to write a story for a French movie? Or did they write a short story somewhere that was like, it made no sense to me.
Did someone write the original short story or something, or have the idea and then the other guy actually wrote the script? I don't know. I couldn't figure it out either.
Yeah, I kept thinking, this was probably based on a book or a stage play, but yeah, I couldn't find out anything about those early days.
Yeah, there's Robert Thorin
and Michael Logan.
Michael Logan, and it looks like Robert Thorin might be German, and then Michael Logan seems to be American, but it was a French movie, and it was like, so yeah, someone out there write in and tell us what was the deal? What's the story?
And then since it's a French film, they break things into, so they got the scenario credit, René Pujol got the dialogue credit, and then Max Brana and Pierre Prévert got the découpage credit. So yeah, I think it was Thorin and Logan that came up with the idea, but yeah, what is the story of those guys? I would really like to know.
Because they're the ones that are also credited on Something Like It Hot. They're credited everywhere for this story. But it's like, why and how and what was it? Was it a scenario originally, or was it a short story? Or anyway, just I was hoping one of you would know, because I was like I tried to look him up and I just couldn't find it.
Yeah, no, I couldn't find anything either, no matter what I looked into. Even finding stuff about the TV show was difficult for a little while. I did finally come across, I think there's a book about the 50th anniversary that was released, and that talks about the TV show a little bit, but not very much. And that was tough to find for a long time, apparently.
Yeah, it wasn't easily available for a long time. It was just something that was in the studio owned, right?
Right. Now it's out on YouTube, so everybody can see it if they want to. All right, let's go ahead and take another break, and we'll be back with the trailer for next week's show right after these brief messages.
A boxer, a fighter, a kangaroo!
Meet Matilda, America's first kangaroo hero. And look who's in his corner. Elliot Gould, Roy Clark, Harry Gardino, Clive Robel, Karen Carlson, and Robert Mitchum as Parkers. You'll love Matilda. Even has Debbie and Pat Boone singing out. Matilda, what a knockout! Rated G.
That's right. We'll be back next week with a look at the boxing kangaroo film Matilda. Until then, I want to thank my co-hosts Heidi and Keith. So Keith, what have you been up to, sir?
Oh, watching the end of the world. Reading the news and going, why did I just read that? No, really just, I'm right now trying to be as happy as I can at a time where I think things are scary and frightening, and trying to do in my little ways what I can do to maybe fight back. That's my biggest thing that I'm doing. I'm a little writing, a little this, a little that, but mostly looking around me going, wow, this is not where I thought things would be 20 years ago. So that's trying to enjoy each day in spite of where things are.
For the audience at home, let me compliment your Make America Rake Again 4 Seasons Landscaping t-shirt. Very nice. 4 Seasons landscaping is my Zoom background most places, so yeah.
Nice. I also think a really good one would be Make America Great Again, but GRATE, for a Parmesan cheese company. Yeah. I am currently working in film acquisitions and distribution for Studio Dome, and I'm in charge of the brand new horror streaming service BloodstreamTV.com, which is great, and I'm very excited about that, and we'll see where that goes. But I'm also spending a lot of time writing liner notes and doing commentaries for releases of various films, some very obscure and some less obscure, but always films that I really love. So I'm very excited to be doing that. It only took me 25 years to get to a point where my hobby of liking and writing about film turned into a career. So if you can hold out for 25 years, you might get a job. So I just want everyone to have faith and to stick it out. Because I know there's a lot of people out there who are like, I love writing about movies, but it pays $100 per review, and I can't live on that. 25 years, that's all you got to wait, and it'll happen. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. You're close. You're very close. Yeah. So yay to jobs. Yeah.
All right. I don't know if I can count my Cashiers to Cinemart time or if it's just the 15 years of doing the projection booth, but maybe one day I will get there.
Well, thank you so much, folks, for being on the show. Thanks to everybody for listening. Do you want to support physical media and get great movies in the mail? Head over to Scarecrow.com and try Scarecrow Video's incredible rent-by-mail service, the largest publicly accessible collection in the world. You'll find films that are entirely unavailable elsewhere. Get what you want when you want it, without the scrolling. And of course, they have Some Like It Hot. If you want to hear more of me shooting off my mouth, check out some of the other shows that I work on. They are all available at WaitingWayMedia.com. Thanks especially to our Patreon community. If you want to join the community, visit patreon.com/projection booth. Every donation we get helps the projection booth take over the world.
so let's turn up the heat till we fry. Some like it hot, some like it hot.